The human being differs from all other animals in being unable to live well as an isolated individual with no partner to help him satisfy his needs. He must be supported by another of his kind, who in turn must be supported by him and his like. When they join forces, they are complementary. This is why humans are compelled to found societies. Avicenna of Cairo, Egypt. Solitary confinement beginning in 1821 at Eastern State Penitentiary is the single quartering of a person with minimal to no contact with other human beings, directly or indirectly, for any length of time. This method slowly but surely leads to the start or the worsening of psychiatric issues. Solitary confinement separates a person that has committed a federal crime or poses a threat to the general population in a cell for 23 hours a day with 1 hour allotted for exercise. Inmates have no control over what happens or when it happens. For example, the lights may be on all day or all night. Solitary confinement is a violation of the Eighth Amendment in the U.S. Constitution and the Fifth and Ninth Articles of the Declaration of Human Rights, as it is cruel and unusual punishment, exile, and torture. The Constitution was meant to regulate laws made by the state. The Eighth Amendment says that no cruel and unusual punishment is allowed. By the several suicide and self-harm cases that occurred in the early years of solitary confinement, it was deemed cruel and unusual in 1913. Why is it still happening? The Declaration of Human Rights states all the rights you are allotted simply because you are human. The Fifth Article states that no one shall be subjected to torture or cruel, inhumane, degrading treatment or punishment. The Ninth Article states that no one shall be subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile. The initial purpose of solitary confinement was to reform behavior and give inmates the time they needed to reflect upon their crimes. Goals were not met and reform was not achieved. As a result, prisoners were suffering with no anticipated impact, growing more ill as time went on. The human being is a social creature, much like many other animals, but more complex. To be a social creature means that one requires interaction with others of its kind. The natural habitat of a human being is a community of other humans. They fend for each other in more ways than one. Some of these include gathering food, providing shelter, and even promoting sanity. An experiment was performed on lab mice to record the behaviors of social animals when they are removed from their natural social habitat to one of solitude. The subject became paranoid, jumpy, and was deprived of sleep. Being alone is a factor that not many creatures have been previously exposed to and would be unsure of how to respond. The mind begins by defending against invisible dangers, which include predators that may not actually be there, and other scares that would normally be anticipated by other members of the group. An individual doing the work of an entire group makes them restless and irrationally afraid. The Stanford Prison Experiment was a similar experiment performed with humans. Oversaw by Philip Zimbardo, who acted as a head correctional officer, college students were split into groups, some prisoners and some guards. The objective was to find out if prisoners began to rebel and misbehave over time, or if there were more contributing factors than one might think. The results were so awful that the experiment had to be stopped after 6 days, though the goal was 2 weeks. Prisoners became violent, a response to the guards assuming the offensive position and stripping them of their dignity and power. Humans respond to powerlessness in one of 2 ways, either fear or aggression. Solitary confinement creates the same effect of powerlessness, therefore the same fear and aggression. But the power is deteriorated over a long period of time, simply because there is no contact. The debate on solitary confinement is an ever-expanding one on the basis that morals are not absolutely the same amongst all of us, and the philosophy of punishment is unrelenting. However, those that do choose to fight this battle in defense of solitary have the major headlining argument that it creates safety for the majority population. Prisoners were put into confinement because of their dangerous behavior. In some way, shape, or form, they put the lives and well-being of other prisoners and the correctional officers at risk. Another defending argument is that there are certain guidelines that the guards have to follow to ensure the safety of both parties. Based on this, the prisoners couldn't exactly be tortured by the authorities. As a default, though not always, the prisoners were treated well. If the conditions of a cell are below standard, no heat or running water, they are either regulated or the inmates are moved to a standard operational room. Although prisoners are confined to a small rectangular cell, they are given other things to do. Sometimes prisoners with good behavior are allowed to watch television. and in eastern state, the prisoners were taught trade skills like welding and knitting. Those against solitary confinement argue that taking any creature unwillingly from their natural habitat is cruel, especially one that is extremely different. The subject is not likely to adjust well under the conditions that solitary confinement provides. First off, humans are likely to first seek alliance and companionship when introduced to a new environment. When a human comes to the realization that there is no contact with anyone else, they will begin to feel lonely. Loneliness is an emotion that eats away at the human like a virus. The brain interprets loneliness to be the equal of pain. If someone feels pain, they are likely to seek a remedy. Some solutions exist in the form of friendships, relationships, social hobbies, and psychiatrists. In solitary confinement, there are no access to such things. There may be psychiatrists, but the option doesn't usually solve the problem. It is proven that solitary confinement promotes insanity. Prisoners report having hallucinations, being paranoid, and having negative feelings that were not present previous to the arrest. In conflict with the statement that it creates safety for the majority population, it creates an unstable character whom will be released eventually. They will be in a worse coping condition than before they entered solitary confinement. Solitary confinement violates constitutional rights and human rights. By this never being argued, are we admitting that the prisoners are not entitled to these rights? Simply by being human, they are born with human rights, and none shall be denied. Being a citizen or even being tried on U.S. grounds, they are entitled to constitutional rights. Exclusion of any party to these rights would make authorities prejudiced, and again would make these exiles arbitrary arrests in violation of human rights. In spite of these two dissenting opinions, both parties can agree on one thing. Humans have the ability to reason, think logically, and to question. Everyone thinks differently, so some things that the general population may agree are immoral may be justified in an offender's mind. The question that settled the debate is, what is a safe, effective alternative to solitary confinement?